Ooh, historical Geoguessr. Looks like we're at some kind of political rally. We have a soldier with IDF paratrooper pins. Oh, yeah, that's the former Israeli Prime Minister, Levi Eshkol. We got to be over here in Israel. What? What was the head of Israel doing next to a Ugandan soldier in the middle of the Entebbe airport? We'll get to that. But first, let me tell you a quick story. On June 27th, 1976, Air France Flight 139 takes off from Tel Aviv Airport on its way to Paris. It makes a quick stop in Athens to pick up some more passengers and quickly returns to the skies. Unexpectedly, however, it starts veering off course. All of a sudden, it starts flying south. In the cabin, there's chaos. 4 of the people who just boarded the plane are not normal passengers. 2 of them are members of the German revolutionary cells, and the other 2 are part of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Together, they hijack the plane and chart a course for Uganda. Little do they know, some random consultant from Philadelphia is about to have his life changed forever. The choice of flying to a seemingly obscure East African nation was no mistake. If you zoom into this border region, you'll see this long stretch of land where Uganda meets South Sudan. But this wasn't always the case. In the 1970s, Sudan was just one big country that happened to share a common enemy with most of its neighbors. I'll give you a chance to guess which one. Yeah, it was Israel. It was Israel. Who could have guessed? After the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel needed a way to keep its enemies occupied. They were terrified that Sudan would link up with Egypt to try to recapture the Sinai Peninsula. In 1969, Israel began funneling weapons through Uganda into southern Sudan, where a ragtag rebel group had been fighting the Arab-dominated Sudanese government since the 1950s. Israel had a guy on the inside of Uganda, a guy who was manic and lacked any real moral conviction, a guy who could get the weapons across the border without asking questions or causing too much of a fuss. A guy by the name of Idi Amin. Idi was a crazy dude. He received almost no real education and was kind of just a loose cannon. Israel saw him as the perfect operative for the job, so they gave him military training, linked him up with the Israeli Prime Minister as seen in this picture, and even tried to take him through a paratrooper course, which he couldn't complete, but still wore his own variation of the IDF paratrooper pin, which I think is kind of funny, and then he made the Uganda one look exactly the same. Anyway, but at the end of the day, Idi longed for power. He wanted to be the leader of Uganda by any means necessary. And the leader at the time was a Pan-Africanist who tried to calm things down in neighboring Sudan. Of course, Israel didn't like that. When Amin told an Israeli colonel that he was going to do a coup, the colonel told Israeli instructors who were working in the Ugandan Air Force not to arm the planes just in case the government wanted to use them against the coup plotters. Amin's personal security unit had been bolstered with Israeli training shortly before the coup as well. Israeli and Ugandan sources later recounted that the Israeli colonel, anticipating the Ugandan president might move against Amin, encouraged him to form a loyal bodyguard battalion of paratroopers, armored cars, and of course, Israeli-trained troops to protect himself. These ended up proving invaluable. With Israel's blessing and arms and training, Amin seized power while the president was out of the country. Amin was a master of propaganda. He would stage photo shoots to make himself seem like the coolest leader in the world. Thankfully, we have Ground News to cut through modern-day propaganda. Ground News is an app and a website that gathers news from all over the world and shows it to you in one place. It even shows you the publisher's political leanings and their ownership structure. Take, for instance, this article about Elizabeth Warren supporting Zohran Mamdani. If we only read an article from the left, we'll read something saying Elizabeth Warren's just saying what we're all thinking. However, if we were to read something from the right, we would read, Elizabeth Warren announces support for Zohran Mamdani, surprising no one. Additionally, you can see the owners of the publications who are actually putting out these headlines, in addition to comparing the bias distribution across a specific article. One of my favorite features is their blind spot feed, which shows you stories that are either under or heavily reported by either side of the political spectrum, and it shows it to you in a percentage right below the article. Subscribe to Ground News today and get 40% off the Vantage plan by scanning the QR code on screen or using my code ground.news/EricH. Thank you so much to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the infamous dictator, Idi Amin. Idi Amin desperately wanted to go to war with Tanzania, but Uganda's military was too weak, so Amin lobbied Israel to sell him fighter jets, which they refused to do because, there was nothing in it for them. Why the hell would they do that? So he flew to Tripoli, cozied up to Muammar Gaddafi, and bought fighter jets from the Libyans instead. But there was a catch. He had to sever ties with Israel and support Palestinian liberation. That wasn't a problem for Amin. He didn't give a shit. But none of this was rooted in any sort of moral framework. He went on to praise Hitler for killing so many Jews and kicked off his bloodthirsty rule in which he killed around 300,000 innocent people. Idi Amin acted on impulse without much regard for human life, which is how he ended up hosting the hijacked plane in 1976. And we'll get back to that in just a sec, but we need to discuss his most notorious decree in 1972. This is Mahmud. Well over 100 years ago, the British Empire brought over his family alongside hundreds of thousands of others from India and South Asia more broadly. The Brits had intentionally used South Asians in Uganda as a buffer between the indigenous Africans and themselves. They used them to build the railroads all throughout the country, and in exchange, they provided the Asians with considerably more than their black counterparts, going so far as to provide some of them with educations. This discrepancy in resource allocation naturally manufactured tension between the two ethnic groups, which culminated in the unthinkable. Amin referred to Asians as brown Jews because of the perception he had over their grip over the Ugandan economy, and he went on to order all 80,000 of them to leave the country within 90 days. Mahmud and his family weren't even able to take more than $50 with them on their way out. They found shelter in a British refugee camp where they largely were excluded from society while they were attacked by British skinheads. Apparently, after Mahmud and his family left the camp, they moved into a more permanent residence. They would still every Sunday go to Gatwick Airport and watch the planes take off to Entebbe, Uganda's international terminal, and would just sit and let their hearts kind of soar with the plane as it climbed in the sky and just crash as the plane disappeared. Every week they would go and they would watch. Eventually, Mahmud returned to Uganda after Idi Amin's reign ended, but wasn't able to reclaim any of his family's property from before. Mahmud's father became a shell of himself and never returned to his work of writing poetry or auctioneering. Mahmud soon met an aspiring filmmaker named Mira, who was in Uganda doing research for a film she later released called Mississippi Masala, which is a fantastic film and you should totally go watch it if you haven't already. Mahmud and Mira got married and had one kid, whose name is Zohran Mamdani. I don't believe any politician is perfect or the savior of society, and I know I've already spoken very highly about Zohran's vision and his campaign more broadly, but I have to say I am grateful that it appears that he's found empathy from this intergenerational trauma, unlike some of his peers, like FBI Director Kash Patel, whose family experienced a very similar story in Uganda, yet it appears he himself is all too eager to instill a similar level of trauma on immigrants and even pro-Palestine demonstrators in the United States. And of course, speaking of Palestine, we have a hijacking we need to finish. So let's rewind a bit and get back on board that Air France flight that's going to change one Philly guy's life forever. Alright, so we're back in 1976, and the plane has just landed at the Entebbe airport in the capital of Uganda. The hijackers released straightforward demands: $5 million and the release of 53 Palestinian hostages from Israeli prisons. They give the Israeli government 48 hours to respond. The non-Israeli hostages are released, and the clock starts ticking. The Israeli government buys themselves a few more days in exchange for hosting negotiations with the hijackers in a neutral location. But the Israelis have a trick up their sleeve. You see, this airport terminal had actually been built by an Israeli construction company, so they knew every square inch of its layout. Rather than release their own political prisoners, they wanted to do the unthinkable, a Call of Duty-style hostage rescue mission, and they put all of their chips on this one man to make it happen. This is Yonatan. He's an Israeli military officer who had previously fought in the Six-Day War and the brother of a Boston Consulting Group employee from Philadelphia. You might see where I'm going with this. The plan was simple. Land a plane at the airport disguised as the Ugandan military, use a replica of Idi Amin's notorious black Mercedes to drive from the plane to the hangar, take out the hijackers, and rescue the hostages. There was only one problem. Idi Amin had recently swapped out his black car for a white one. So when the plane lands and the wrong colored car comes driving out, two suspicious Ugandan soldiers approach it. Now you might be wondering, how the hell did they even get onto the runway in the first place without alerting the Ugandan soldiers guarding the hijackers? Were they really that incompetent? No, of course not. Idi Amin was tipped off before the rescue mission happened, and he sent out a memo to all the soldiers saying like, hey, please don't shoot. We don't want an international catastrophe involving Israel. That would be really bad. However, Yonatan was a bit of a hothead. He wrote an infamous letter to his brother stating, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with a good fistfight. On the contrary, if you're young and not seriously hurt, it won't do you real harm. Remember what I told you? He who delivers the first blow wins. In other letters, he referred to his brother as his only true friend. So what happened next would change the course of history forever. Rather than talk with the Ugandan soldiers, Yonatan pulls out his pistol and fires at them. They, of course, fire back, striking him, but both are killed in the process. The gunfire alerts Amin's other soldiers, and the rest of the raid is filled with a similar degree of chaos. In the process of rescuing most of the captives, the Israeli commandos kill all of the hijackers, in addition to at least 2 of the hostages. As they rush back onto the plane and make their escape, Yonatan mumbles his last words, bleeds out, and dies. When news reaches his brother back in the US, he's devastated. He couldn't eat solid food for weeks. He had to take a break from his consulting job to set up a memorial foundation for his brother in Israel. In an interview with Newsweek, he said, "My brother's death changed my life and directed it to its present course." In the subsequent years following the raid, he entered Israeli politics under the name Benjamin Netanyahu.
As though somebody amputated my arms and my legs and tore a piece of my heart. Yeah.
Had his brother not been killed, had Idi Amin not permitted the hijackers to land in Uganda, had Israel not armed and funded Amin's coup, there's a very good chance that Benjamin Netanyahu would just be another wealthy consultant living in the suburbs of Philly or Boston. And now we find ourselves at a strange point in history where the brutal and erratic legacy of an African dictator shaped the lives of both the Prime Minister of Israel and the future mayor of New York City. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu on the indisputable charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity, as he's likely responsible for an order of magnitude more death and destruction than Idi Amin could have ever dreamt of. Zohran Mamdani is slated to become the next mayor of New York City in November 2025, and he stated that he would uphold the court ruling and arrest Netanyahu if he were to step foot in New York City. Weirdly enough, if Israel just hadn't helped Idi Amin violently take power of his country and subsequently expel Uganda's Asian population, there's a good chance that Zohran would just be a rapper living in Kampala.
Chop it up, chop it up. Kinda, and yeah, mere, kinda, be a bad baby.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you'd like to see an interview with a lady in Israel who's refusing to join the IDF and is about to go to prison to serve her, refusal time, I'll have it linked on screen somewhere over here. And I think it's worth a watch. It's super cool. She's awesome, and you'd probably enjoy it if you got this far in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.